Isabella had big, curious eyes, the kind that seemed to absorb the world more intensely than any child her age. Perhaps because from a very early age she had learned to observe in silence, hoping that life would reveal to her some hidden secret, some gap where the love she was looking for could fit. Ever since her parents left, an accident, they said, she had clung to the memory of a warm lap, a laugh echoing through the house, a lullaby murmured in her ear. But the memories, even sweet ones, did not fill the void. In the orphanage, Isabella grew up between cold walls and hurried voices. There was no lack of food, no clean clothes, but the warmth of a presence that said, "You matter." This has always been a distant luxury. Still, she smiled. With a worn pencil, he scribbled small worlds on loose sheets, where he saw himself flying through enchanted forests or drinking tea with talking dolls. It was his way of resisting. There was something about her that refused to accept that this would be her life forever. Sometimes he would hide behind the curtain of the living room to watch couples who came to meet the children. She imagined what it would be like to hold that adult hand and walk out the door, knowing that someone had chosen her. Entirely. For love. The day she learned she would be adopted felt like a dream. The orphanage's director, normally stern, smiled when he called his name. He told him that a family had shown interest, an important family with a well-known surname, a large house and an impeccable reputation. They said she would be very well taken care of, that he would have his own room, books, toys, even a piano if he wanted to learn. Isabella couldn't contain her joy. Perhaps, finally, he would find what was so lacking. They dressed her in a flowered dress and braided her hair. When the black car pulled up in front of the gate, his heart was beating faster than ever. She didn't know it, but she was about to walk through the door to a completely different reality from the one she imagined. The house was beautiful, tall, quiet, with impeccable gardens and long corridors. The first impression was one of dazzle. Everything there seemed too perfect, like a set for a movie that had not yet started. The woman who received her was elegant, with a rehearsed smile and measured words. The man next to her just nodded, as if performing that ritual was part of a protocol. He was told that he was now part of the family. But no hugs, no "welcome, dear." Only instructions, where to store shoes, mealtimes, tone of voice allowed, inside the house. In the first days, Isabella tried to understand. I thought maybe they were just getting used to it. Perhaps they were shy. Maybe love would come later. She did everything right. She made the bed perfectly, thanked them politely for meals, kept silent when asked. But as time passed, the hallways of that house grew colder, and the walls more oppressive. There was no laughter, there were no bedtime stories, just a meticulous and unquestionable routine, as if she were another piece of furniture. The woman, whom Isabella never heard called Mother, seemed to be proud to keep the house in perfect working order. Isabella was part of this order. She was instructed to keep her room spotless, to study with discipline, not to ask questions. Any attempt at a more intimate conversation was received with a cutting gaze, as if affection was a waste. The man, always absent, looked more like a portrait hanging on the wall, present but unattainable. Isabella began to wonder if she had done something wrong. Wasn't it good enough? Were they expecting another child? Over time, the girl's eyes lost some of their shine. He still dreamed, but now in silence. She secretly read the books in the library, trying to find in them the tenderness that reality denied her. Her dolls, though lined up on the shelf, no longer spoke. The piano, promised, never arrived. And the dinners, always punctual, always silent, were like ceremonies where one ate the absence. She moved around the house like a light shadow, doing everything not to disturb her. His every step was calculated, every word measure. But inside, something difficult to name was growing. It wasn't just sadness. It was a feeling of being out of place, as if I had entered a tale where the happy ending had been torn from the last pages. On a particularly silent night, Isabella watched the dark sky through the window. The stars far away seemed closer than anyone in that house. The girl, wrapped in a blanket, felt the cold that came not only from the weather, but from the absence of any gesture that warmed up. And it was there, in that instant frozen in time, that something inside her began to change. It was not revolt, it was not giving up. It was as if a small flame had been lit, a seed of doubt, of restlessness, and perhaps courage. There was something strange about that house. It wasn't just the absence of love. It was the way everything seemed to work perfectly, as long as she didn't ask anything, as long as he obeyed, as long as he pretended that everything was fine. But something was not. Isabella began to notice small signs, small noises hidden under the impeccable routine, doors that closed too quickly, looks that avoided his own, muffled whispers behind the walls, a subtle but insistent feeling that there was something there that he had not been told. What started as a home full of promise now seemed to hide too many secrets. And Isabella, even small, began to wonder what was really behind that perfect facade. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to discover that some fairy tales hide dark chapters, and that sometimes, in order to survive, it is necessary to wake up before the happy ending. If you're feeling this story transform, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Isabella began to understand her true role in that house as the days passed, or perhaps as the silent humiliations passed. It soon became clear that adoption was nothing more than a pretext. She had not been chosen to be a daughter, but a functional presence, an additional piece in the cold gear of the perfect family. He didn't wear the same uniforms as the others. He didn't eat at the table. He wasn't part of the framed photos in the hallway. It was like a blur between the golden frames. Someone whose existence was only remembered when there was something to be done, something to be cleansed, something to be carried. His bedroom, or rather the small space where he slept, was behind. The kitchen, in a stuffy area that looked more like an adapted warehouse. There was a narrow bed without a headboard, a worn sheet, and a small chest of drawers whose drawers jammed. There was no window. The air was dense, humid, as if the place had forgotten how to breathe. In the first days, Isabella still woke up early with some hope. She thought that if she was good enough, dedicated enough, maybe she would get a look of affection, a spontaneous gesture of acceptance. But what he received were orders, demands, indifference. The routine began before sunrise. She prepared breakfast for the house, tidied up the rooms, collected clothes, polished furniture. Everything had to be impeccable before the family's children woke up. The biological children. They had huge rooms, private bathrooms, private tutors, closets full of new clothes and colorful books. When they crossed paths with Isabella in the corridors, they did not always look her in the eye. Sometimes they pretended she wasn't there. Others told her to get out of the way. She heard the laughter coming from the open windows, the games in the backyard, the weekend trips, to which she was never called. The feeling was that of being trapped in a shop window where everyone was looking, but no one was seeing. With every careful gesture he made, with every attempt to please, the answer was always the same: silence. A heavy silence, which seemed to grow and mold itself around her, squeezing as if to suffocate her. And even so, she insisted. She folded the towels with care, polished the cutlery until they reflected the light, discreetly decorated the dishes, waited, with an almost childlike hope, for a thank you to escape from some corner of the house. But nothing. And when he made a slip, no matter how small, a glass out of place, a forgotten book on the table, a button that came loose from a shirt, the punishment came quickly and coldly. She was sent back to her room without dinner. Sometimes I heard screams, others he was beaten without anyone seeing. They didn't leave visible marks, but the ones that hurt the most were the ones that stayed inside. There was an almost surgical precision in the way they ignored and punished her, as if they had learned to erase someone without raising their voice. In the few free hours she had, usually at night, when everyone was already asleep, she took refuge in the only consolation she knew: reading. She took books hidden from the house library and read them avidly, lying on her side in the dim light of an old lamp. That's how he fled. He created other worlds, other names, other stories. In many of them she was loved, valued, welcomed. There was a quiet force growing in her, born of this nightly practice of reinventing herself. But during the day there was no room for daydreaming. The floor needed to be clean, the glass shining, the dishes made, the garden watered, the dog fed. Yes, even the dog. a white Labrador, huge and docile, who received more affection in an afternoon than she did in months. She watched from afar the caresses, the laughter, the care of the animal, and felt smaller and smaller. The contrast hurt. I was inside a rich house with all the material comforts, but I didn't belong to any of that. It was not a party. It was a presence that was required to be efficient but invisible. On some special occasions, parties, important visits, business dinners, she was locked in her little room. They said it was to avoid confusion, so as not to interfere with the harmony of the night. At these times, she would sit on the edge of her bed listening to the music in the distance, the clinking of glasses, the muffled sound of conversations and laughter that echoed through the house. And I wondered if at some point someone would arrive who noticed her absence, someone who missed her. But no one felt it. The absence of affection became so constant that Isabella began to believe that the problem was with her. Maybe it was hard to love. Maybe it was really a broken child. After all, her parents were gone. No one at the orphanage chose her for years, and now, even though she was adopted, she was treated like a well-trained burden. The pain of abandonment, which had already been intense in the past, returned with a new weight. An abandonment that hurt more because it now happened inside what should be a home. Isabella kept everything in silence. He didn't cry wherever they could see. He showed no weakness. But inside, the sweet and dreamy girl was beginning to fade. Gradually, that vibrant hope that always accompanied her was transformed into a more discreet type of resistance. It was no longer the desire to be loved. It was the desire to survive, and maybe one day escape. One afternoon, while organizing the books on the living room shelf, a task that required almost obsessive precision, he noticed something strange. A space behind the row of larger books seemed hollow. The touch there echoed differently. He felt his heart beating faster, but he hid his curiosity under the mask of servitude. It was not the time to ask questions. Still, the detail was etched in his mind like another whisper in that house, where everything was forced silence and disguised control. The routine went on, and the days passed without major changes. She was still there, firm, silent, efficient. His every gesture was careful, every word avoided. The house seemed to demand this restrained perfection, as if any deviation was punished with total oblivion. But what the owners of that house did not know was that, even silent, Isabella observed everything. Every look, every lock turning on the doors, every hidden key, and little by little, a new restlessness grew inside her, still shy but constant. She no longer dreamed of belonging to that family. I knew I wouldn't be accepted, no matter how hard I tried. But something was beginning to change. What was once a desire for welcome now became a desire to understand, to find out what was behind the impeccable facade. Why would such a seemingly perfect family adopt a child just to hide him and use him as a maid? Why so much effort to silence someone? So small the questions had no answer, at least not yet. But the seed had already been planted. And Isabella, even exhausted, even injured, was beginning to listen more carefully to what the house was trying to hide. Perhaps what bothered that family the most was precisely this, that despite everything she was still there, still resisting. Still pay attention. What she didn't know was that the echo behind the bookshelf wasn't the only secret in that house, and that very soon an oversight would reveal much more than anyone imagined. The silence that hung over the mansion that day seemed denser than ever, as if the heavy air carried with it the weight of what was about to happen. The usual routine, with its mechanical steps and dry orders, was interrupted by a growing buzz among family members and employees, who exchanged tense glances and spoke in hurried whispers. One of the most valuable treasures in the house, a necklace inherited from the matriarch, had mysteriously disappeared, and its disappearance reverberated like a shock in every room. The object, known not only for its exorbitant material value, but for the symbolism it carried, a heritage that represented generations of power and status, became the center of a maelstrom of suspicion. Although no one had concrete evidence, the atmosphere in the house quickly filled with veiled accusations and early trials, and, as always happened, all eyes turned to Isabella. Without a word of comfort, without the right to a fair defense, Isabella felt the weight of the conviction fall on her shoulders before she even had a chance to deny it. The girl who had always known what it was like to be invisible in that home was now the focus of suspicion. The doors closed on her, not only physically but also emotionally. That accusation wasn't simply about a missing necklace. It was the cruel repetition of a silent condemnation, born of the prejudice and neglect that had surrounded her from day one. Isabella tried to explain, swore innocence, begged for a chance, but her words seemed to echo in a void where no one was willing to truly listen to her. It was as if his voice had been programmed to be ignored and his pleas not to matter. The trial had already been made, and she was nothing more than a guilty intruder in those cold, suspicious eyes. The matriarch, who until then had maintained a distant and imposing air, showed an even greater coldness. His eyes did not seek the truth. They only confirmed the preconceived suspicion. The absence of empathy was so clear that it was suffocating. To the family, Isabella was not an adopted daughter, a child with feelings, but a replaceable employee, someone to be discarded at the slightest sign of trouble. Even in the midst of humiliation, Isabella remained firm, absorbing every accusatory look, every veiled comment, every door that closed in her face. She didn't know how far that accusation would take her, but something inside her refused to budge. The injustice that plagued her was a new form of abandonment, one that hurt even more because it came from those who were supposed to protect her. The news of the necklace's disappearance spread beyond the walls of the mansion, reaching the ears of neighbors and acquaintances of the high society that surrounded the family. Cruel comments and speculations began to emerge, fueling the contempt and isolation that Isabella already faced. The girl who dreamed of a welcoming home now found herself in a public nightmare, where her reputation, her dignity, her very existence were at stake. The weight of suspicion became a constant shadow, accompanying Isabella's every step through the house. She was no longer just the invisible servant. Now she was the suspect, the guilty one, even without a crime committed, without a true motive, without a real chance of defense. And what had previously been an environment of silence and coldness now seemed charged with an almost palpable tension, where every look was a sentence and every gesture a trap. Even so, Isabella did not let despair take over. In silence, he drew strength from what no one else saw, his hidden courage, his quiet determination. She knew that this accusation was more than unfair. It was a clear manifestation of everything she had always faced in that place, a cruel prejudice that saw her not as a person, but as a problem to be discarded. That morning, as the house boiled with doubts and accusations, Isabella felt that something inside her was beginning to change. The pain of rejection and injustice aroused a flame of resistance, a growing desire to show that she would not be defined by the suspicious gaze of those who judged her without evidence. And although she couldn't yet imagine the consequences that episode would bring, she knew that her life would never be the same again. As the family's hurried steps moved away and voices dropped, Isabella remained there, alone in her stuffy room, feeling the weight of the missing necklace hang over her head. That object was not just a jewel, it was the symbol of the abyss that separated her from a family that never really wanted her. And that abyss, silent and cold, was now the scene of a battle she had scarcely begun to understand. Little could she imagine that the necklace, which seemed like just a detail, would be the fuse for deeper secrets to begin to surface, secrets that would change everything, reveal hidden truths, and perhaps finally show Isabella that even in the midst of darkness, there was a light waiting to be found. At this moment, the fate of the sweet and dreamy girl seemed to hang on a fine line between abandonment and hope, and that morning, marked by the disappearance of the necklace, would be remembered as the instant when everything began to fall apart so that something new could emerge. The door of the mansion closed with a dry bang, leaving behind the echo of a life that Isabella thought she had found, but which quickly turned out to be an unfettered prison. Without even having time to collect her few things, she was expelled, as if she were a broken, useless, disposable object. The words that accompanied it were like sharp blades, cutting through what little was left of her hope and dignity. There was no room for arguments, explanations, or excuses, only harsh orders and explicit contempt. She left without looking back, her small body trembling against the cold wind of the street, while the sky seemed to darken even heavier in her chest. Every step taken over the rough concrete was a cruel reminder of the abandonment that now ran even deeper than before. The sweet girl who dreamed of being loved, protected, and welcomed had been thrown into the world like a forgotten piece of garbage, without the right to anything, without a single gesture of compassion. The cold of the night and the loneliness of the streets were nothing compared to the emptiness that Isabella felt inside herself. Betrayed, hurt, defenseless, she walked aimlessly, trying to understand where she had failed, what she had done to deserve such rejection. He found no answer, only the deafening silence of a broken heart. It could never be called home. No, it had been a luxurious prison, a mask of wealth and comfort that hid an abyss of cruelty and indifference. However, as the pain tightened and the darkness seemed to want to swallow her hesitant steps, something began to sprout in that deep sadness. A small spark, barely noticeable, but intense enough to withstand the crushing weight of abandonment. It was an inner force, a quiet whisper. That told her that despite everything, she could still choose her own destiny. That she no longer had to accept being seen as invisible, nor treated as less than she deserved. Isabella found herself in that pain like never before. That dark moment, instead of breaking her for good, began to shape a new kind of courage. She decided that she would never allow herself to be treated like garbage again, that her life would not be defined by the contempt of others or the scars of the past. The girl who had previously sought a home transformed that night into a young warrior, ready to fight for her place in the world, even if it meant facing storms alone. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and fears, but Isabella knew she needed to keep going. Every step she took through the dark streets was an act of resistance, a silent affirmation that, despite the cruel expulsion, she still existed, still dreamed, still had value. The world outside, with all its coldness and indifference, would no longer be able to extinguish the flame that was beginning to burn inside her. And so, in that painful moment, a new story began to be written, a story of overcoming, struggle, and discoveries. Because even when all seems lost, there is an invisible force that can transform pain into impulse, abandonment into strength, silence into voice. And Isabella was just at the beginning of this path, where the past would no longer be a prison, but the basis for an unexpected future. Deprived of any protection, without a roof to call her own, without a family to support her, Isabella felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she carried within her a strength that no abandonment could erase. That moment of utter helplessness was, paradoxically, the starting point for a new journey, one that would be guided by a burning desire to change his destiny, to rebuild his life from scratch, but this time with fury and focus. She faced the streets of the city with a quiet courage, that kind of courage that didn't need to be announced out loud, but that pulsed strongly with every step she took. To survive, she took on humble and exhausting jobs, clerk in stores, cleaning houses she could never imagine cleaning, tasks that would crush many, but which for her were only temporary steps towards something bigger. While her days were filled with endless journeys, her nights were dedicated to books, to the search for knowledge that would transform her into someone capable of commanding her own destiny. The hard routine and challenges seemed to want to break her determination, but Isabella had something that few have, the ability to turn rejections and humiliations into fuel to grow. Every door that closed in his face, every look of contempt or mean remark was kept, not as a defeat but as a reason to try even harder. The silence that enveloped her was not a sign of giving up, but of a fierce determination that grew day after day, fed by the certainty that the suffering present was only a chapter and not the entire book. She observed, learned, and planned in silence, shaping a clear vision of the future she wanted to build. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about winning. It was about coming back different. To return with my head held high, with the strength of those nights of study and our arms strengthened by hard work. She was no longer the invisible, forgotten, unjustly accused girl. She was a young woman who carried a fire in her chest that no one could put out, a fire that pushed her to dream big and to fight tooth and nail to achieve each of those dreams. In this process, Isabella also discovered the power of resilience, this almost magical ability to get back on her feet even when everything seems to come crashing down. While many around her gave up, surrendered to discouragement and fear, she went on steadfast, step by step, day after day, even when fatigue seemed to want to overcome her. Her life was a silent battle, marked by small achievements that no one saw, but that for her meant the world. By turning each no into fuel, Isabella taught herself that true strength did not come from comfort or immediate recognition, but from persistent effort, from the courage to continue even when no one else believed. This strength, cultivated in the anonymity of lonely nights and the sweat of exhausting days, would be the solid foundation on which she would build what many considered impossible. It was his own revolution, silent but relentless, and as time passed, what once seemed like a fragile and lost girl was transformed into a determined woman who understood that the path to success would never be easy, but that it would be hers, whatever the cost. Isabella's internal revolution was taking shape, and the dream of one day returning different, of proving to everyone, especially herself, that she could do more, became more and more real. That was just the beginning of the story of a life marked by overcoming, a story that showed that even in the darkest moments, the will to change, to grow and to win can light the way. And when you look at the horizon with that burning flame on your chest, no storm seems insurmountable. Because Isabella's real battle was not against the outside world, but against the limitations that she herself had learned to break down, and it was this battle that would lead her to what was to come. Time does not forgive, and it passed quickly, drawing a surprising trajectory in Isabella's life. That young woman who walked the streets of the city with no certain destination, carrying only the pain of abandonment and the tireless will to win, had become an imposing woman, master of her own destiny, and of a company that was growing visibly. The invisible girl who was once pushed out, discredited and humiliated, now commanded an empire built with sweat, intelligence and determination. The elegance that emanated did not come only from the expensive dresses or the glitter of the jewelry she wore. It came from the security he had conquered, from that firm look that no longer accepted being underestimated. Isabella not only changed her financial situation, she revolutionized her entire life, creating a new identity, a narrative of success that no longer allowed the past to define her. Every obstacle he had faced served as the basis for his ascent, and every tear she'd turned into strength to never give up. Even with all she had achieved, there was an inner silence, a wound that never stopped bleeding, the mark of that abandonment, that betrayal, that prejudice that had cast her out as if it were less than nothing. This pain, kept under lock and key in the heart, pulsated with intensity, reminding us that the past is not erased, it is only transformed into learning. The invitation to the charity dinner, sent by the same family that once despised her, came as an irony of fate, almost a test for this woman who had been humiliated and ignored. It was an unexpected invitation, one that stirred her emotions, stirring painful memories but also igniting a flame of justice and retribution. It was not only an opportunity to show how much she had grown, but a chance to face head-on what marked her, to look into the eyes of those who had treated her as invisible and prove that a person's value is not in the origin, but in the strength with which she struggles to get back on her feet. On the night of the event, Isabella entered that mansion that she already knew so well, but that now seemed different, almost strange. The lights, the chandeliers, the walls, adorned with expensive paintings, everything seemed like a backdrop from a past she didn't want to revisit, but had to face. Eyes began to turn to her. Some were slow to recognize that elegant and confident woman who exuded power and success. Silence filled the room as she introduced herself, her firm and sure voice breaking the atmosphere of comfort of those present. It was impossible to ignore the transformation, the rise of that girl who, years ago, had been discarded like garbage, as if she were worthless. The impact of that unexpected presence created a tension in the environment, a heavy emptiness that seemed to scream louder than any words. Those people who once had the power to make Isabella disappear now found themselves in front of a woman who not only existed, but shone brightly, showing that true value cannot be erased by indifference or prejudice. She didn't need to prove anything to them, but the mere existence of her there in that moment spoke louder than any accusation or judgment of the past. Isabella knew that this night was much more than just a charity dinner. It was a turning point, an opportunity to close a painful chapter and make room for the freedom he had sought so much. Despite the silence that dominated the room, there was a vibrant energy that seemed to invite everyone to reflect on what it really means to value a person. It wasn't about wealth, status, or appearance. It was about recognizing the dignity that exists in every human being, even when the world insists on denying it. While the guests exchanged uncomfortable looks, trying to understand what that woman represented, Isabella remained calm, as if she were on a stage where she was the protagonist of her own story. That moment, so charged with emotion, was concrete proof that true victory is not only in material success, but in the ability to transform pain into learning, abandonment into strength, and contempt into inspiration. The past, once a burden, now served as the foundation for a present full of possibilities. Deep down, Isabella knew that that encounter would not erase the scars she carried, but she also understood that true healing did not come from forgetting, but from acceptance and confrontation. That awkward silence was only the prelude to the change that she herself would provoke, not with empty words or revenge, but with the simple demonstration that human dignity is immeasurable and that no judgment can destroy those who truly know and respect each other. She walked through that room with the certainty that her place in the world would no longer be decided by anyone but herself. The comeback that no one expected was not just a matter of status or money, but a quiet triumph of a soul that refused to be broken. And at that moment, the past seemed to finally find its balance with the present, preparing the ground for a future where Isabella would be the owner of her own history, without strings attached, without fear, ready to show that someone's value should never be measured by the prejudice or ignorance of others. The atmosphere in the room seemed frozen, as if time had stopped, and every movement sounded too heavy for that luxurious environment once so familiar to Isabella. But this time, the sparkle of the crystals in the chandeliers did not overshadow their presence. On the contrary, it seemed to highlight his ruthless determination. The contrast was sharp. This girl who had been humiliated, expelled as if she were worthless, now dominated the scene with a quiet authority, the result of years of internal and external battle. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent knot between unspoken memories and unrevealed truths. She knew that every word she was about to utter had the power to shake not only the structures of that family, but also the beliefs and judgments that had nurtured so many years. It was not just about remembering a painful past, but about unearthing the truth buried under layers of lies, accusations, and complicit silence. That moment was not for revanchism, but for justice, a justice she sought not only for herself, but for all those who were once treated as invisible, disposable, unjustly accused. With an almost disconcerting serenity, Isabella began to tell what she had discovered. Her words, firm and clear, outlined a picture that went beyond emotions. They were facts, concrete evidence that transformed the distorted narrative imposed against her into an unmasked hoax. The investigations he had ordered to be carried out, the testimonies collected, the old images recovered showed a different scenario, an indisputable truth that could no longer be ignored or silenced. That necklace, which had been used as a pretext for her expulsion and defamation, had not only not been stolen by her, but by the most arrogant son of the family, the same one who, with more hatred than reason, had accused her. The silence that followed was heavy, full of tension and disbelief. Some tried to disguise their embarrassment with averted looks, others with nervous smiles and words of minimization, in a frustrated attempt to escape the reality that had been exposed to them. But Isabella remained motionless, letting the truth speak for itself, watching the subtle change in the expressions of those who had been her tormentors for so long and now found themselves caught in their own web of lies. It was a moment of revelation, of dismantling the false certainties that sustained the power of that family over his life. There was no longer any way to deny, hide, or manipulate the facts. The truth was a flame that once lit, consumed the darkness of injustice, illuminating every corner where they tried to hide what really happened, and this revealing light could not be extinguished by silences or empty excuses. Isabella felt a mix of emotions, but mainly the conviction that this was a decisive step towards her definitive release. She did not seek revenge, but rather the restoration of her dignity, the recognition that she had been the victim of a grave wrong, an act of evil that left deep marks, but which had also forged her strength. Each piece of evidence presented not only dismantled the unfair accusation, but also reconstructed her story, piece by piece, showing the true woman who has always existed behind the pain and prejudice. As the murmur among those present began to grow, the tension-laden atmosphere gave way to a new feeling, a kind of respect, however troubled, that began to emerge in the face of the courage of that woman who dared to face the past head-on without fear of the consequences. It was as if, for the first time, they recognized that the truth had a greater weight than any particular privilege or interest. That dinner, which was supposed to be just another social event to show off status and charity, turned into a stage where hidden stories came to light, where masks fell and where justice, even if late, began to be present. Isabella, with her firm presence and precise words, rewrote the script of that night, giving voice to the truth that had previously been silenced, bringing to light what many wanted to forget or hide. The tension still hung in the air, but now it carried a new meaning, no longer fear or silent shame, but the certainty that the past, no matter how dark, could no longer dictate the present. Isabella knew that that exposure, that courage in confronting those who had hurt her, was just the beginning of a profound transformation. And as the shadows of the night spread through the windows, lit only by the reflections of the lights in the hall, it was clear that this woman's power came not from her wealth, but from the unbreakable strength she had built on truth and resilience. The dinner, which began with an icy and tense feeling, began to be marked by the unexpected twist where justice began to find its way, even in the most unlikely places. And Isabella, by remaining firm, showed herself not only as a survivor, but as a protagonist of her own story, ready to unveil every hidden secret, to break every silence, and to transform that moment into a mark of redemption and personal triumph. The air was still heavy when Isabella retreated from the center of the room, not as a defeated woman, but as someone who carried a mission accomplished. That moment, which could have become a spectacle of destructive accusations and bitter revenge, took a very different turn. She was not there to destroy but to rebuild, not the reputation of others but her own, which for so many years had been vilified, ignored, and unjustly tarnished. The strength that emerged from it was the result of a profound transformation, forged in the fire of difficulties and tempered by the silence of those who learned to observe without being shaken. Isabella knew she could expose everything. She could reveal every lie, every act of betrayal, and leave that family at the mercy of public derision. But its purpose went beyond simple, momentary satisfaction. What she sought was to restore the dignity that had been stolen from her, to earn the respect that had never been granted to her, and finally, to have a say in her own history. It was justice that moved his every step, justice that is not measured in applause or humiliation, but in the serenity of those who know that the truth prevails, even if late. Every glance that crossed hers at that dinner carried a mixture of surprise, fear, and perhaps for the first time, a shred of recognition. Isabella no longer felt the weight of shame that had once been imposed. Now that shame seemed to hang over those who had once hurt her, reversing the roles in an ironic and fair way. That space, which had previously been the scene of exclusion and pain, was transformed into a silent witness of the definitive turnaround, where power changed hands, and those who had previously judged were now judged by the truth itself. Photo. Departure from that environment, elegant and full of luxury, was not discreet, but it didn't have to be thunderous either. The natural grandeur he carried came from within, from an unshakable conviction, from a certainty that surpasses superficial words and acts. She left that dinner as she entered, firm, secure, self-possessed, carrying not only the years of struggle, but the certainty that life is not about what they make us, but about what we choose to become despite it. Isabella's journey was still far from easy, as the weight of the past and the scars of injustice still called for attention and care. But she knew that this moment had opened a door to a future where she would no longer have to prove her innocence to anyone, but only live fully, with the freedom of someone who has earned her place in the world by merit and truth. The strength that radiated now was a beacon for all those who, at some point in life, felt crushed by circumstances, reminding them that destiny can be rewritten and that the greatest justice is the one that is born from overcoming. Behind that newfound glow, there was also a rare serenity, an understanding that justice is not synonymous with revenge. Isabella chose a different path, one that required even greater courage, to forgive without forgetting, to move forward without rancor, and to use her story to inspire real change. The echo of the past still resonated, but no longer as a chain. That bound her, but as a reminder of how much she was capable of resisting, growing and winning. As the lights in the hall slowly dimmed and the uncomfortable murmurs dissipated, Isabella walked outside, carrying with her a powerful and silent message. That woman who had once been marginalized and discredited was now a symbol of resistance and justice. His trajectory showed that true victory is not in direct confrontation, but in the firmness of those who do not let themselves be shaken, who maintain integrity even in the face of the greatest adversity, and who understand that true justice is the one that restores balance, and not the one that feeds the cycle of hatred. Thus, while the night enveloped the city with its cloak of mysteries and possibilities, Isabella walked away from that house, ready to continue her journey, aware that the fight for truth and justice is constant, but also transformative. The story she was writing now was one of overcoming, of regained dignity, and of a silent power that grows in those who refuse to be defined by the past, but choose to walk a path of light and truth, even when the shadows insist on trying to return. It was a new beginning, a new phase where what matters is not what was taken, but what was achieved. And in this game of forces, Isabella not only imposed herself as the winner, but also showed that true justice does not need screams or revenge. All it takes is the courage to look inside, face what was, and move forward, stronger and more upright than ever. The stage was set for this woman, whose history had been marked by pain, to now be celebrated for the strength and example she became for many, not by chance, but by choice. The next chapter of this trajectory, still to come, holds secrets that reveal how delicate and nuanced the search for justice can be. Meanwhile, the certainty that remains is that Isabella will not back down, will not bow down, and will continue to write her story with the courage and dignity that were never denied to her, even when all seemed lost. The justice she seeks is not only for herself, but for all who were once silenced and forgotten, and who now find in her a strong and true voice. Isabella woke up to a life completely different from the one that the past had imposed with such cruelty. Each step he took towards this new reality was as if he removed layers of an old skin laden with scars and deep pain, to finally reveal a genuine essence, a renewed soul. She had freed herself from the weight of the injustices that had suffocated her for so long, and not only that, she had turned that load into fuel for a greater purpose, a calling that went far beyond her own history. Peace, so sought after and so distant for years, was finally beginning to settle in his heart. It was not a peace of silence or oblivion, but an active peace, built on the firm ground of overcoming and acceptance. Isabella understood that true victory lay not in erasing the shadows of the past, but in allowing them to serve as a springboard to something greater. And so it was that, far from the ties that bound her, she decided to create projects that would rescue not only young orphans, but also the hope that often seemed lost in her eyes. Through these projects, Isabella invested in education, not only as an academic tool, but as a transformative instrument that could break cycles of exclusion and abandonment. She knew that education was the key for others like her to find a different path, a path of opportunity and dignity. More than that, she sought to create true bonds, build a support network that would strengthen those who, like her one day, felt the weight of the world on their shoulders. His story, which could once be seen as a narrative of suffering and injustice, now shone as a source of inspiration. Isabella proved that it doesn't matter where someone comes from, but what you do with the pain that life imposes. She was no longer the girl who begged for love, who hid behind fear and shame. Now she was a whole woman who loved herself deeply, who recognized her worth, and who no longer allowed anyone to silence her or define her by the mistakes of others. The transformation she experienced was palpable in every gesture, in every decision. There was a serene firmness in her posture, a confidence that did not need to announce itself, because it overflowed naturally. Isabella no longer sought the approval of those who despised her. She sought to build a legacy, to leave a true mark that would surpass generations. His journey was, above all, a celebration of human resilience, a silent invitation for all those who suffer to understand that it is possible to rise from the ashes. However, this new phase did not mean that the past was completely forgotten. On the contrary, it was still present, but now in a new light. Each wound healed brought with it a lesson, a learning that strengthened her even more. Isabella knew that carrying the memory of the injustices she suffered did not make her a victim, but an empowered woman who recognizes the importance of her trajectory. She turned every tear shed into fuel for building a better future, not only for herself, but for everyone who crossed her path. Around her, people began to notice this profound change. Those who had known her from the beginning, or even those who had only heard of her story, now saw an Isabella who inspired confidence, respect, and admiration. Not because of the fame or the money he had earned, but because of the inner strength he emanated and the genuine commitment to help others. His presence was living proof that overcoming is possible, that dignity can be restored, even when it seems lost forever. Isabella came to be seen as a beacon for many who were still in darkness. His life became a testimony that despite adversity and injustice, it is possible to rewrite one's own history and build a path of light. She knew that each young orphan who achieved her projects was a silent victory, a seed planted so that the future could be different from the past. And this mission, which seemed so far away in his most difficult moments, was now the reason that guided his days. While investing time, energy, and resources to transform the reality of those young people, Isabella also nurtured herself with the same care that she dedicated to others. He had learned to love himself unconditionally, to recognize his qualities and accept his imperfections. This self-love was the foundation that supported her entire new life, and that ensured that she would never again fall victim to the circumstances or opinions of others. Now she owned her own voice, her own history, and no one could ever take it away from that. Isabella's transformation was not only external, visible to all, it was, above all, a profound and silent change which reverberated in his heart. The pain that once consumed her gave way to a silent and constant force, which pushed her forward, even when the paths seemed uncertain. This force, born of suffering, had become the engine of a meaningful life, filled with purpose and committed to the common good. As her trajectory unfolded, Isabella felt that she had finally found her true place in the world. It was not a place defined by titles or material goods, but a space where she could exercise her power of transformation, where she could be true to herself and her values. There, far from the shadows of the past, she allowed herself to dream, again, build again, and above all live fully. Isabella's story is above all the story of a woman who refused to be silenced, who did not accept the fate that was imposed on her, and who, with courage and determination, created a new life. A life where pain is not forgotten, but resignified, where the past is not a prison but a path to freedom. And it is at this point, in this place of renewal and hope, that she continues, ready to face the challenges that are yet to come, with the certainty that her true power lies in the ability to reinvent herself and love herself without reservation. Thus, while Isabella consolidates herself in her new journey, the world around her also transforms. Each project, each smile she helps to build, each young person who finds a chance to start over, is concrete proof that pain can be transformed into hope and that inner strength is capable of changing destinies. Isabella is no longer just a name or a story. It has become a living symbol of what we can all achieve when we choose not to give up, when we embrace our truth and turn our wounds into a source of light. If you've come this far, it's because this story has touched something inside you, that quiet force that insists on moving forward even when all seems lost. And it is exactly this type of content that we always want to bring. Real stories, full of teachings that help to see life with different eyes, to find courage where it seemed not to exist. If that made sense, stay here with me. Subscribe to the channel to follow more trajectories that inspire and show that, no matter how difficult it may be, there is always a way out and a way to turn the tide. If you want, leave a comment saying, "This message was for me, so I know that we are really connected." It's a simple way to share this energy that we build together during the video. And if you felt this connection, a light like also helps to strengthen this exchange between us. It's like a sign that we are walking together in this search for stories that really matter. There is a video here on the side that tells a similar story, full of challenges and overcoming. Click there and stay with me there. We continue to discover together the power that exists in those who have been wronged and how the true victory is not in revenge, but in the strength of simply winning.